All right, so we're going to be talking about medicinal mushrooms. We need a disclaimer. I'm not a medical doctor. This presentation is not a recommendation for medical treatment. All I can say is this is what I would be doing. Okay, the information and formulations are presented and intended as a brief introduction to current historical uses of research of mushrooms. And I think this is important. A healthcare professional should always be consulted for diagnosing and treating any disease and condition, and especially when combining medical modalities and combining multiple herbs or fungi. And we'll see an example in our pharmaceuticals. So that's our disclaimer. This is the introduction, and that's as in let's get into it and let's immerse ourselves. So this is a plan. We're going to talk about chemistry first, and then give you an idea of some of the compounds that are present, and then we'll talk about the mushrooms and point out some of those mushrooms and compounds. We won't get to part 2, but it's one of our favorite parts as far as looking at a whole different way of prescribing and using mushrooms, because these people were using them long before Western medicine. All right, so this is penicillin, and many of you probably know that penicillin is quite possibly the first fungal product that was isolated and used by Western medicine by Fleming and people before him, if I had my notes. And over 200 million lives were saved with penicillin. And after that, they isolated many. How's it sound, by the way? Okay, and many antibiotics were isolated from many different lower fungi or molds or whatever you want to call them. And for some reason, that's all they looked at was the lower fungi. And Western medicine never looked at the mushrooms and the macrofungi. And it turns out they're just as unusual organisms, and they have just as unusual properties and chemistry and biochemistry. And they interact even more holistically, if I could use that word, than do the molds. Although yeast may be another story. Okay, so here's the conclusions of the talk. Eat more mushrooms, okay? It's been very well shown, may not be a lot of double-blind studies that the compounds in mushrooms and just the whole mushrooms themselves have anti-cancer properties. They have antiviral properties, they have antimicrobial properties, both as preventives to help you prevent cancer and virus infection, and as protectants, as well as knocking the cancers and the viruses and the bacteria out. They work very well in combination with traditional methods, right? Mushrooms have been used in combination with chemotherapies and radiation therapies, with antibiotics and with vaccines. They have a lot of antioxidant properties. Every mushroom has antioxidant properties. Every mushroom tends to be anti-inflammatory. There's immunostimulatory properties, and immunosuppressive properties, and immunomodulatory properties. And a lot of these properties that we see are actually coming from the cell walls of mushrooms, which are very similar throughout the different mushrooms. Organoprotective, from nerves to the digestive system, from your mouth to your colon. Cardioprotective, liver protective, and I don't have it. I have a mouse. And kidney protective, and they act as tonics, just as does ginseng or ashwagandha or something like that. Cholesterol lowering properties, blood pressure lowering properties, and they actually help balance the blood concentration, whether you're hypo or hyperglycemic. There's some compounds that have anti-abuse activity. Mushrooms should be in your first aid kit, powdered mushrooms, such as just puffball spores in order to massage wounds. One time I cut off the tip of my finger trying to cut through a piece of frozen something or another, and it just like made an inch, not my bad, but it was just pouring out, and I just took my little bag of puffball spores and sprinkled it on it, and they were just like little corks. Just everything stopped. Okay, I put tendinizing powders down here because there's a slide at the very end of the show, right before part 2 or right in the beginning of part 2, where it shows 20 different mushrooms used to just make one combination for tendons. Okay, so we're starting in the beginning. Okay, we're gonna do the chemistry first. In the beginning, this is the current view, sorry. This is the current view of a proton from Scientific American. And those are a lot of quarks and stuff like that. And a proton is basically ionized hydrogen. So a hydrogen atom is 1 proton and 1 electron, and you ionize that electron and you have a proton, and it probably makes up a large part of the mass of the universe. In my notes, I had how much proton weight, like that. And why is this here? This doesn't belong here at all. That's a whole nother, oh, no, it is, I'm sorry. Okay, so it takes 2 hydrogen atoms to make a hydrogen molecule. And you can see the 2 hydrogens there. Oh, we do have a mouse. And this sphere represents the 1s orbital, the lowest orbital that the electrons are going around in. This is an anti-bonding orbital, right? Since we have 2 atoms, we have to have 2 orbitals. But anyway, so this cloud that the electron bounces around and it swings in, that's a 90% cloud. And in quantum mechanics, the electron has a 100% chance of being somewhere in the universe. But it's 90%, 99% here. So there's our electron. If we just have 1 hydrogen atom, it has 1 electron, and then from there we go into the protein. But that's not what was supposed to happen. All right, we'll go back. This is a website. That's actually a molecule of protein, and this is a website we'll talk about a little later. Let's move forward. What did I do, Graham?
Go back to your present keynote. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so these are the websites here. And this, if you've never gone to, you're into science at all, whether it's genetics or biochemistry or organic pathways, these 2 websites are really fantastic. This comes from, dang it, I don't know what my limitations are. Oh, here we go. So here's the website. You see, I could do things with the website. It's a lot of fun. Go back. There's proteins, and then there's also the genetics, and there's also pathways, et cetera, et cetera. And then the structure, this is an enzyme structure website. Okay, so we have our periodic table of the elements. And I was realizing that there's not a lot of color in some of these chemical slides. And so I wanted a periodic table that had some color in it. And it turns out that they've just done a Quechua based periodic table of the elements that chemical and engineering use. So if you haven't had any chemistry, all these, here's hydrogen atom with 1 electron and 1 proton. Here's a helium atom with 2 protons and 2 electrons, 3, 3, 4, 4, et cetera, et cetera. And then those are atoms. And some atoms exist independently in space and time as we know it, and others have to be combined together. Like you don't find hydrogen atoms on Earth. You find hydrogen molecules where 2 hydrogen atoms combined. And then we could take other atoms and, such as carbon. And organic chemistry is mainly about carbon. And carbon always forms 4 bonds. And you saw some of these molecules pouring around. For instance, right? These are all carbons at all these angles. And there's always 4 bonds, whether there's 2 double bonds and 2 single bonds or whatever, there's always 4 bonds to carbon. And this allows them to form all these complex rings. And actually, it doesn't just have to be a ring. We could open these rings up. And we can have long chains, and then we can start getting other elements attached to them. So we go from atoms to molecules to compounds. Okay, oh, I guess we just go on to the next slide. Okay, so carbon atoms can connect to other carbon atoms to form long chains, branch or cyclic. They can, so if you have a carbon compound with 20 carbons in it, it could be arranged in many different ways. And then it can combine with other elements to become bioactive, and the reactions are predictable. And so these are just a bunch of hydrocarbons. Again, I lost my mouse. And so these hydrocarbons are just made up of carbon and hydrogen. They don't have much biology to them as far as we're concerned. But when we start adding other functional groups, such as we get alcohols, ethers, aromatics, or the alkanes, alkenes, and aromatic hydrocarbons. If we add an OH, on here, if we add an OH to a carbon, the R stands for carbon, we have an alcohol. If we add another R to that water, we have an ether. Okay. If we have a double bond oxygen, we have ketones. If the double bond's at the end of a chain, it's an aldehyde. Anybody know any aldehydes? An aldehyde, something that smells better? Vanilla. Vanilla is an aldehyde. Okay. What's an acetone? Sorry, that's wrong. What's a ketone? Acetone. Nail polish remover is a ketone. Okay. Carboxylic acid. Name a carboxylic acid. Come on, you guys know this. Vinegar. Thank you. Vinegar. Okay. Ether we've already gone over. If we take a carboxylic acid, such as acetic acid or vinegar, and we take off water and add an alcohol to it, we get an ester, such as methyl butyrate, which smells like bananas. Okay, so a lot of fruity smells are esters. If we take a carboxylic acid and see our last one with nitrogen, that's an amine, and that could be attached to an alkyl, and we attach an amine to a carboxylic acid, losing water, we get an amide, and those are going to be very important. Okay, so we have alkanes, alkenes, alkynes, aromatic hydrocarbons, alcohols, ketones, aldehydes, carboxylic acids, ethers, esters, amides, and amines. All right, so that was organic chemistry, the first semester of organic chemistry. Okay, so now we're going to do biochemistry 1A. And you guys know a lot of biochemistry, right? Why do you know about biochemistry? Because you eat, right? Because you eat. You all know the different food groups. And that's what biochemistry is basically about, the different food groups. So we have carbohydrates. I wish I had the mouse. We have, which, stands for hydrated carbon. It's molecular formulas. If we count up all the atoms, RC, there's NCs, and there's NH2Os. It's hydrated carbon. And those are sugars or saccharides or saccharides, right? If it's a single sugar, it's, okay, we'll come back to these. Lipids are fats. One of the main places we see fats is in our membranes. It makes up our cell membrane. Those are a special kind of fat. Fats also include terpenes, and we're going to see a lot of terpenes. Terpenes also have good flavor. They're scent. All the essential oils are terpenes. Okay. Amino acids, we'll get to those. Nucleotides, we'll see ATP and cordyceps in DNA. And phenolic compounds. Another nitrogen compound we didn't mention are the alkaloids. And those are compounds that have really a lot of interesting pharmaceutical properties, and they're all derived from amino acids. Phenolic compounds, we'll see a lot of, and the phenolic compounds tend to have antioxidant properties. Oops. I forgot about this. Okay, so here's some carbohydrates. This is chitin. I thought it was chitin. Is it chitin? Okay, so this forms the lower level of a mushroom cell wall. It's polyglucose, but it's substituted with a glucose amino group. Here's glucose. I don't know why the chitin came first. Chitin. Okay, this is all the same molecule. There's a linear drawing for simplicity's sake. There's the cyclic drawings of the different forms. And if you look at the top two, one's labeled alpha and one's labeled beta. And that's really important when we start going into polymers, multiple lengths of sugars, of glucose or fructose. Okay? If it's alpha, it's going to be a starch and it's going to be used for energy. If it's beta, it's going to be structural and it's going to be such as cellulose, okay, or chitin. Okay, there we have fructose. Instead of having an aldehyde, it's a ketone. You saw that glucose is an aldehyde. So it forms a 5-membered ring instead of a 6-membered ring, although sugar, glucose can as well. Good. Name the molecule. Good. Okay. So trehalose is also known as mushroom sugar, right? And it has really interesting properties. It's an anhydrobiotic. Does that sound like a word we know? Biotic, hydrobiotic, water, anhydro, anhydrous, without water. So an anhydrobiotic is a compound that helps protect cells from losing water. So that's one reason why mushrooms make very fine cosmetics. And we actually have some here to sample of a shiitake lotion, if we have some time, that we put together. Here's glycogen. Okay, that's what we store our sugars in. It's an alpha-linked sucrose. It's just polysucrose. Here's cellulose. It's just polysucrose. Sorry about that. Polyglucose, it makes up starch. Polyglucose makes up cellulose. The only difference is how that oxygen is holding it, what side the oxygen is. And we don't digest starch. We don't digest starch. We don't digest cellulose, and it's very strong. There's chitin in the molecule. Okay. So everybody loves these terms, and we're not going to read it just for time purposes. But if you know the language, it's just a language, and you take it a syllable at a time or a piece at a time. Glucose is glucose. Purinoso means it's a 6-membered ring, okay? And you could draw this molecule just by reading its name. Okay, this is lanthanum, and this is from shiitake. And it's very useful as an anti and co-cancer therapy. Okay, so here's the cell wall of a mushroom. And you see the chitin is just a very small part of that mushroom or that cell wall. And then you have these beta glucans that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about as being immunostimulatory or being immunomodulatory or being anti-inflammatory, and all mushrooms have this. And they make up a much larger part of the cell wall than does the chitin or chitin. Okay, and then you have these nanoproteins, which I haven't quite got a handle on, but I was reading something about their presence and messing up the fermentation of wine with yeast. And here the enzymes that are synthesizing them and extruding it. And it also used to be thought that cellulose, or claimed that cellulose was the most common polysaccharide on the planet. But there's been some claims that mycelium or mushrooms make up 80% of the biomass, in which case it's going to be beta glucans that are making up the mass. And cellulose is, and especially since we're cutting down the forest, cellulose is, I'm sorry, it isn't. Okay. So here's some anti-inflammatory molecules. We have trehalose as A. Okay. We have lanthanum as B. These are all anti-inflammatory. And we have ergothioneine. And notice ergothioneine it has all kinds of different elements in it. You see a carboxylic acid group in the far upper right corner, at least from my perspective. You see a amino group, so it's an amino acid. And it's derived from an amino acid called histidine. And it will come back to it. It's being called the long life vitamin. It has all kinds of different properties. All right, let's get into terpenes. Terpenes are all formed from isoprene, that single 5-carbon unit on the left. Your left? Yes, okay. You can kind of see the 2 double bonds there. And you can imagine if you put one isoprene next to another isoprene, and flip one double bond, that would flip the other double bond, and it could flip the double end of that double bond, and you start getting polymers. Okay? And so you can take 2 isoprene units and make a monoterpene, such as geraniol, the smell from roses, or linalool, the smell from lavender, or limonene, the smell from lemons. Okay? 3 isoprene units, you have C15s. Nubuline, for example, is down here. The next one just below isoprene. And it's one of the major terpenes in hops. Okay. Diterpenes, C20s, very important. You'll see a number of diterpenes. Vitamin A is a diterpene. The cyanthines are diterpenes. You haven't heard of the cyanthines, but you may know of them if you're taking lion's mane. And they're one of the compounds that helps nerve stimulation. Triterpenes, 6 isoprene units, and that forms a steroid, can form a steroid and there's swelling. So this long compound here, can you hear me when I'm yelling in the back? Okay, that's squalene, right? And I could draw it like this. And so you can see how now you can start forming these rings. And you get this steroid ring. It's really pretty cool. And so steroids are very important for anti-inflammatory. I'm sure you all know that. Anti-itch, right? There's all kinds of things we use steroids for. Our hormones are all steroids, or a lot of our hormones. Okay. This is a great paper. And this is just looking at, and there's a couple of these papers. One's just looking at this distribution of fungal terpenes, in this case, diterpenoids. There's another one that's looking at sesquiterpenoids. And so, for instance, we have some different structures. Here's our cyanthine structure. And this is they've taken all these different terpenes that have been, or these diterpenes that have been isolated from fungus, and they've divided them into these pie charts. And so you see cytotoxicity. What do we mean by that? We mean anti-cancer agents, okay? Makes up the major part of the pie. Neuroprotection makes up a large portion of the pie. Other activities, 12. Antiviral activity in terpenes is rather low, but still there in some. Antifungal activity, which is interesting. Enzyme inhibition. I hope everybody knows what an enzyme is. We'll try to talk a little. Antibacterial. I mean, you could have activity. And then you also have a pie chart that shows the types of genera. And some, well, it's kind of unfair. The trichoderma has the biggest, size of the pie. Penicillium is the next biggest. Up here at around 2 o'clock, the gray, that's Hericium. That's our lion's mane. If you want to point out. Organoderma is that little yellow strip just below Hericium. And then you have the different skeletons of the triterpenoids. And the cyanthines are the most common, and not many of us are familiar with them. And then you see some of the structures there. And you see pea oysters, a number of different. These same people did the sesquiterpenes in the same way. All right, phenols and polyphenols. These are oftentimes, here's lignin. Let's just take a look at lignin, okay? So you've heard of ligniculous mushrooms, right? Now, I made these dyslexing here. Those are the brown rock ones, correct?
White runners eat lignin.
Thank you,
Brown
right?
runners eat cellulose.
Okay, thank you. Got that? Right water, well, white, and I had to go to a speech therapist in second grade. Right water, white, okay, say again, please, James.
White runners eat lignin. Brown runners eat cellulose.
And ubiquinone, this is CoQ. And this is why these phenols are antioxidants. I mean, what makes an antioxidant? What makes an antioxidant is that it's easily oxidized, and so it protects your cells from being oxidized because it could be damaging. And this is just an example of an oxidation reduction that happens back and forth in your body and your mitochondria to create energy. And you see the oxidized form of CoQ on the top, and ubiquinone, and the reduced form on the bottom. And we use this electron that's coming off when we oxidize CoQ to create ATP, which is our currency of energy. And that's happening in our mitochondria. And don't confuse grifolin, because there will be a test at the end with grifolan, okay? One's a poly. What's grifolin? Polyphenol. What's grifolin? You know. No grifolan, I mean. Beta glucan, right? Okay. Good naming, right? Okay. Okay, amino acids and peptides and proteins. What's going on? Oh, I get it. Can you see that? Okay, I can do it. This is a simple amino acid. It's the simplest amino acid. It's called glycine. And you can see that those are mirror images of themselves, right? Just like gloves and shoes, and your right shoe doesn't fit that well on your left shoe, and your left shoe on your left foot, and your left foot shoe. Anyway, they're not, you can't overlap them. They're mirror images of us. We are basically made up of L amino acids, for what it's worth. We have 20 amino acids. It's like an alphabet. We have an alphabet of 26 letters, and we could write millions and unknown numbers of stories. The same thing with these 20 letters, right? We could put them in different orders, and they can combine to make peptides and proteins. Okay, so here's one amino acid being bound to a second amino acid to form a peptide bond. And the order of all these different functional grouped, right? All these amino acids have different functional groups. They can be divided into different groups, right? Those that like water, those that don't like water, those that are aromatic, those that are basic, those that are acidic. Those have different properties and create different structures. And those structures are designed to do different things, whether it's your muscles and being structural and supportive, or whether it's amylase, which is digesting starch when you chew bread in your mouth. And there's proteases that digest protein. If you eat a steak, right? You eat a steak, it's a big long muscle, it's a big long protein, and you break it down into its individual amino acids, and you use those individual amino acids to build you. This is a amino acid from Coprinus atramentarius, I believe, and it's called coprine. It has an antabuse activity. This is why you can't eat Coprinus of this species within 24 hours plus or minus of drinking, and it doesn't take much Coprinus or much alcohol to make you violently sick, is my understanding. This is a agarotine, and this is found in all agaricus mushrooms, or at least in bud mushrooms. And you'll notice that double NH or NN, that's a hydrazine. And hydrazine is poisonous, and there's a whole group of very poisonous mushrooms with hydrazine. But this is cooked upon eating and breaks apart, but you're not supposed to just put your head over a pot of mushrooms. Cyclosporin. And then here we just have the names of a bunch of amino acids. And it's forming a cyclic peptide using those bonds. And this is Tom Volk's mushroom, or peptide, Professor Volk's peptide. Just its member peptide. Cyclosporin, you know, it's used for tissue rejection and organ transplants. Here's the cyclic peptide out of the deadly Amanita. Here's cyclosporin again. And this is actually an anamorph of a cordyceps mushroom. So it's a different form of the mushroom that just lives in the soil. All right, nucleotides. Everybody, this is another alphabet. We have these 4 bases, or 6 in this case. We have pyrimidines and purines, and we have uracil, which is an RNA, thymine, cytosine, adenine, guanine. Those form our DNA and RNA. They do so by being linked by a sugar and a phosphate to a 3' 5' sugar. So here's a 5 position and here's a 3 position. And we link these groups together and we get these long, incredible chains. And it's our DNA. And the way they happen is by this base pairing mechanism. We're not going to go into hydrogen bonding too much, but we have GC and AT. And those pair with each other. And then these enzymes just come and clip them all together. And so you have half of your original DNA, and then you get all these little pieces and puts it all together. And so that allows things such as cordycepin, which is up there, and it's 3' deoxy. So here you can see this ADP and this ATP, which we'll talk about in a second. And we're missing one of these OHs, one of these hydroxy groups of cordycepin. Otherwise, it looks just like adenosine, right? If you take off the phosphates there. And so that's one reason it could act as an anti-cancer agent, because it could pair up with a viral particle that's trying to replicate itself. But when it gets linked together, it will fall apart because it doesn't have a 3' hydroxy to form the bond. And so every place there's going to be an adenine, that's going to fall apart there. That's going to fall apart there. So now you've killed the virus or the cancer cell that's growing very quickly. Okay. AZT is another example where they use a reactive compound. Other nucleotides include things such as NAD, FAD. These are vitamins or coenzymes. Nicotinamide is a B vitamin. Most of our B vitamins are some form of a purine or a pyrimidine base, and then they're combined with sugars and phosphates, to make these nucleotides, and they help catalyze reaction. Aridinine is from, I hope I'm getting this right, I get them mixed up, is a nucleotide from shiitake that helps lower cholesterol. We'll see it when we're looking at oyster mushrooms. This one helps lower cholesterol by encouraging the breakdown of cholesterol. Lovastatin from oyster mushrooms lowers cholesterol by blocking the synthesis of cholesterol. Okay. Oh, I want to say a little bit about ATP and ADP. So again, our body, we have about 50 grams of ATP in our body. And we use that up, and then at night we could replenish it. I think that's the number. And so basically, it's called adenosine triphosphate. You see the 3 phospho groups on it. And it's just like breaking a stick. You break off that phosphate bond and energy is released. And so then your body takes it, that phosphate, and puts it, and you end up with a phosphate group in ADP. Your body puts phosphate back on, and you keep cycling through this. Okay, so that's your source of energy, and that's why it's so important. And that's also why cordyceps can be the athlete's molecule, or why cordyceps could be the athlete's molecule. We'll come back to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so here's the mushrooms. We have the petrifytosal mushroom in Utah. We have birch polypore that we're going to look at. And the ones that are underlined are some of the major, that's pretty good. So you graduated from chemistry, and I don't know how much my time is, but chaga, turkey tail, reishi, maitake, cordyceps militaris right now, lion's mane, Hericium erinaceus. Ed, please. Lentinus, or is it lentinulus now? Edodi, shiitake, oyster mushroom, king oyster mushrooms. Those are all readily available at the supermarket. And the other conclusion is putting these in your diet, eating maitake, eating lion's mane, but especially shiitake and king oyster mushrooms have really great just tonic properties, if you will. Amanita muscaria is a good edible. Okay, is everybody heard of it? Okay, so now we're back to historical events. Everybody's heard of Otzi? Okay, so we've been using, am I missing a slide? We've been using fungi for many thousands of years. This is the corpse of the Iceman. 5,000 years ago, he was wandering around and somehow he froze. They found a number of mushrooms on him. One was definitely, they thought, for making fire, and the other one they weren't sure of. Beautiful, beautiful. National Geographic. So this is Pitaporus petulanus. And there's a polyporinic acid that I really need in my notes. Birch conch. Antimicrobial, anti-tumor, anti-neoplastic, same as anti-tumor, antiviral. It among its other properties. Has tiny terpenes, including these polyporinic acids. This has been used in vaginal tumors and wound staching, pitapene, and betulinic acid. Betulinic acid is anti-cancer. I believe pitapene is antibacterial. I really need it along with my notes, but so it'll make us go faster. What else grows on? So that's what else grows on birch. I flicked the slide too fast. Sorry. All right, this is chaga. It also grows on birch. It also contains betulin and betulinic acid, and it's actually being made in the birch tree. Okay. It also has anti-tumor, immunomodulatory, adaptogenic properties. Okay, and this steroid. Can you see behind the screen there? This is out of the way. Okay, so we have a steroid, a terpene with immunomodulatory and adaptogenic properties. So it's amazing how much range of activities we're seeing with these different compounds that have the same functionalities. I mean, even with we don't see any. We haven't even talked about the beta glucans or the polysaccharides in chaga, but they're in all mushrooms, and they all tend to have anti-inflammatory properties. And then there are some that have anti-neoplastic properties as well. And then here's another steroid that has all these antimicrobial, a multitude of that properties. Okay. So here's some of the claimed properties. Again, anti-cancer, antiviral. And I had tables made up, or was making tables up, which we don't have. I could get those to you. Anti-cancer, lung, bronchioles. looked at some that I find really interesting that may not be found so commonly in others. Melanoma is not commonly found as being treated by mushrooms. And yet here we have a mushroom that is very high in melanin, very black, very dark. It's nice to see gout and colitis and Crohn's in the anti-inflammatory column as far as what's being treated. Not a lot of mushrooms. Oops, what have I done? I leaned on my. Yeah, let me get that down without doing. Go back. All right. Pancreatic cancer is always nice to see, or pancreatitis is always nice to see in a mushroom being used for column, because it's supposed to be so painful. As I understand it, I have not had the pleasure. Thank you. And same with gout and Crohn's. And there's not a lot that modern medicine, or that the Western medicine, I should say, is able to do for some of these, and some of the treatments are rather harsh. So having mushrooms, again, it can work very well with traditional medicine. Asthma grows on birch. There's a whole business about the wild crafting of chaga, and those are big mushrooms, and people collect the old ones and they just cut them off. Some of the mycelium stays behind, but it takes a long time to regrow, and does it regrow before the tree is cut down? So you have to be careful. I've heard different stories about sustainable harvestability. The black portion is the sterile portion, leave the red portion. It's very difficult to see how that's done. I've talked to this fellow in Utah who is from Alaska, who has a chaga conservation sustainability project going, and he says you very seldom see the mycelium of chaga, and it's just still unclear to me how fast it grows back or how it can be harvested sustainably. Finally, there's this issue about oxalate. And we have a link to this bioanalysis of oxalated mineral content in select mineral edible mushrooms, but we'll just go forward. This is from Fungi Magazine in the summer of 2019. And they found oxalate concentrations in chaga to be 14%, over 14%, which is really quite low. And for instance, that would be 142 milligrams per gram of chaga. People who have problems with oxalate and kidney stones are advised to be on low oxalate diets and to only have 40 to 50 milligrams a day. So that's about 350 milligrams of chaga it comes out to. And many people are taking, 500, 100, 1,000 milligrams a gram of chaga a day. It's about 5 times or such more than is recommended. There's other papers that show that there's a lot of cases of overdosing on chaga and developing kidney neuropathies. I love this picture. This was taken in Henry Cowell, Redwood State Park. I was hiking with a friend there. This turkey tail, this was a 12-foot log. It was completely covered like this. And it was just so beautiful, I just couldn't harvest it. It's like, I still regret it. There's a lot of medicine there and it would have come back. So turkey tail is one of my favorites. It contains, it's famous for its crustin polysaccharide. Turkey tail was one of the first mushrooms that was used as an anti-cancer agent by modern medicine, if you will. It is used, you did not have, you were not being treated for cancer in Japan without getting turkey tail to keep up your immune system, as well as to help fight combined with the radiation therapy or the chemotherapy to help fight the cancer. And there's two different components. There's more than two. There's actually some terpenes, but there's this crustin, and which is a soluble polysaccharide, and it's a beta glucan. And then there's this cyclic polypeptide, or this cyclic peptide. Let's see. I think we're gonna go on. Let's go with this one. Okay, anti-cancer, prostate, lung, colorectal, pancreatic, and breast. Again, prostate's a good, I mean, these are chemo preventive, right? Having some turkey tail tea in the morning doesn't hurt, sorry. Antiviral, HPV viruses, HIV, autoimmune conditions, lupus. That's one that's very hard to treat. It's a tonic. PSK doesn't just help kill cancer cells, it improves blood vessels to function, it tonifies the spleen. Seeing things for chronic fatigue syndrome is very nice. The peptide has an effect on high blood sugar. So do a lot of these polysaccharides. Just these being in a polymer form, they help inhibit the breakdown, and not being broken down themselves, they help occupy the enzyme that frees up glucose to give high glucose. Traditionally, it is used for respiratory disorders, digestive and urinary tract disorders. Again, good for energy and stamina and useful for hepatitis. And you get to see these over and over and over, so we'll whip through a lot of them. What's going on here? Why do I have two? Interesting. Okay, reishi, another one of my very favorite mushrooms. This is a Chinese herb store in Richmond, British Columbia, just across the bridge from Vancouver. And those ling chi are as big as serving dishes. They were really big. They were really nice. They have these great choppers, like a paper cutter. Slices. This is a photo by Michael Wood showing some pretty big rishis, and I'm not sure where he took this picture. Ganoderic acid. What kind of compound is it? We'll be here all night. Terpene, steroid, right? See the 4 rings? Okay. This is a great book that we just got. It's actually one of the second, third ebook I got, and it's so nice to be able to just put in a mushroom or put in a cancer and go from page to page to page and get all your pages and not have to hunt through it. Rishis are tremendous mushrooms. This is, again, we're showing our terpenes here and how they decrease inflammation, reduce stress, increase mitochondrial function. Does everybody know what a mitochondria is? Anybody not? Everybody's good with mitochondria? Okay. Antioxidant, increasing cholinergic neurotransmission, modulate the immune system, just basically promoting health and longevity. Chronic fatigue system, and then he's emphasizing breast and prostate as far as treatments go. Reishi is one of the great liver protectants, and they also give it in dementia. It's one of the compounds that was, and there's pages of these things, of the adaptogenic effect. Nervous disability. Here's a recipe for using it to protect your liver when you've eaten poisoned mushrooms, along with your milk thistle. The anti-allergic effects. My brother-in-law came to visit with my sister, and we were up at the cabin, and my friend had been living with us, and he had a cat there. My brother-in-law was extremely allergic to cats. And he was just dying, and his anti-allergy pills weren't working, and his asthma pills were starting to cook in. And I made a good, strong cup of reishi, and he wasn't somebody who, but he was as willing to try anything. And 5 minutes after sipping a cup of reishi, he totally calmed down. It was pretty impressive. I was impressed too. Made a believer out of me. And I was already a believer. An ingredient for UV protecting. Oops, let me go back here just a second. Interestingly, it was one of the ingredients. They don't want to release their formulation. The high altitude tonic that was used by the Chinese army in Tibet. But just a great tea. It's one of my favorite teas is a combination of reishi, red ginseng or white ginseng, astragalus, and a little bit of licorice. Just boil it up in the morning. Yeah, just pages of effects. This is from Hobbes. Bone marrow enhances bone marrow nucleated cell proliferation. We all need that, you know. Again, just antiviral, just an important. This is a tonic mushroom that you can't overdose on. And it's a great bitter. It makes a great combination with coffee, as does chaga, but you don't want to use too much chaga. Now, we're not going to find reishi here, and I kind of hesitate to bring up mushrooms that we find around here that are kind of similar, because there are so many people hunting, and it's not always for, you know, they want, sometimes they just want them all. So here's our artist conch, which we'll find around here. Similar medicinal properties. It's an adaptogen, it's antioxidant. It's anti-cancer, antiviral, immunomodulator, anti-inflammatory, gastric ulcers. It's also hepatic protective. I haven't really tried it myself. This was taken in South Park years ago. I think this actually won the photo contest one year, or third place after Ed and Coco. All right. I like this chronic paste from the fruit body applied to your gums for excess salvation. That's interesting. I don't have a good picture of polyporous frondosa or Grifola frondosa. I wish it grew out here. I know they're just fantastic. I mean, if reishi is the king of mushrooms, Grifola frondosa maitake is the queen of the mushrooms, and its anti-cancer possibilities are extensive. We're not going to get into it too much. Mainly, this is the one that actually has gotten a lot of attention recently from Western medicine, looking at fraction D. It's the 3-branch beta-1,6-glucan peptide. That means it's about 10% of a peptide of a protein attached to this long polysaccharide. They've been isolating it and injecting it. There is problems with delivery. The ones that it is known for, prostate, again, leukemia, which is important. You could read these: lung, stomach, breast, colorectal. Poor appetite, hair loss. Again, having these mushrooms while you're getting chemotherapy or radiation, it's going to help. As usual, liver, kidney, respiratory. And we see colorectal cancer. Did I mention before? Okay, so I was on the ski lift on A Basin. This was 20 years ago. And there's a fellow who is my age now, when I was 20 years younger, sitting next to me. And he had just been through his 4th stage 4 colon cancer assessment. And he'd gone to, traditional therapies, not just been through, let me go back to the story. He'd gone traditional therapies 3 times and knocked it back, and it would come back in half a year or something like that. And finally, the 4th time, he just said, enough's enough. And he just started pounding. I didn't bring this up. He brought this up. This is what's so interesting about it. He just started pounding mushrooms. You know, he had read about them and he just started pounding mushrooms. He was doing ounces a day. And he had gone 2 years without a remission, or in remission without the going. And again, it's a delivery situation. It's like, it's a colon, here's a tumor, here's some fiber for you. And it really worked for him. It was really nice to hear. It's a good story. Okay, this is the caterpillar fungus that started the whole shebang. This is a picture taken in China, Tibet, at about 12,500 feet, I think. Daniel Winkler got mad because when I found the mushroom, I cleaned it up, but we posed it anyway. It was covered with a nice winter coat of mycelium, you know, and we should have gotten the picture, but I was too excited. Okay, so this is a very, very expensive, and I don't think I have a whole talk about cordyceps, and it has some pictures of these Tibetans sitting, you know, against the wall on the street with a pile of cordyceps. And just the caterpillar was this big. These are really fine, and it just and I'd go up to buy some, and Danny just goes, no, we're gonna wait till we get to this place. Like, no, I'm gonna buy some from every little person I can. But anyway, lung cancer. It's known that it's used exclusively by the emperor, especially known for impotence and backache, an antidote for opium poisoning and addiction. While we were there, we collected it and I cultured it in my bathroom, and we were growing it on rice. And I had a friend who was addicted to heroin, and he really felt it did knock down his craving, which is interesting. 92% improvement in patients. Preparation to 15 grams. We were able to buy some, and then we went to Taiwan, and my wife's friend was the head of the Mushroom Growing Association, and we were able to get a lot of cordyceps, and we put a lot in our turkey, and it was just add that something else. One time we made chicken soup. Here I was eating with duckers. Well, we used chicken in this case, and Telluride, and Gary Linkoff was there. And we had a big pot of cordyceps soup. We had just come back from the trip, and it was a pretty expensive pot of soup. and there are all these mushroom people, and Gary Linkoff was there with his chopsticks, and he pulled it out of cordyceps. And there's this caterpillar hanging off of this mushroom. And then nobody would eat the mushroom. It's like everybody would eat the soup. It was hilarious. Very few people would try it. It was pretty hilarious. So we took it all home, and not a drop got wasted. It went into the freezer. We just had cordyceps for a long time. Yeah, I was surprised. There's a Chinese women's track team, world records, in 1993 and 94, and they passed the drug doping tests that year, and they said they were using cordyceps. And again, it's the ability of cordycepin to mimic ATP and to encourage, or ADP, and to encourage oxygen utilization and energy production. Here, 3 to 9 grams, simmer the decoction 2 times a day. As a tonic, 15 grams with chicken tea. That's only going to be about $200 cordyceps. It's in essence. So, you know, and here again, here's our adenosine, and here's our cordycepin. Sorry. Probably knew my head was in the hydroxy. So now we're lucky they found Cordyceps militaris, which has the same nucleotides at an even greater concentration, apparently. And the mycelium is much more like the fruiting body, although in our exams when I was teaching at UCD, we thought they were identical. but other people say they're not. But again, the same properties, the same compounds, affordable, the same price as Hericium, right? And lion's mane, if you're buying in bulk, and neurotrophic, anti-cancer, neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory. And again, a great one to have is just a tonic. And I just actually got 30 kilograms of powdered mushrooms from a company that I really like, respect. And when I was making up some powders for some people, I licked the, there's the tray, the bowl after and I spread my finger and looked at, and then how many people eat yeast with their popcorn? Anybody have nutritional yeast with their popcorn? Delicious, right? I tasted this cordyceps. It's like, oh man, I have enough of this to sprinkle on with my yeast. It's like, it's just perfect. And you can get get an ounce of cordyceps powder. I think Whole Sun sells 2 ounces for $45. It's not too unreasonable to sprinkle it on your popcorn with your yeast. And by the way, yeast has a lot of good beta glucans too. All right, lion's mane. What are you using lion's mane for? You guys can all give this lecture, right? Everybody's into lion's mane. All right, so my family has a history of Alzheimer's. So I use lion's mane a lot. And mainly we're looking at its neuroprotective properties and its neurotrophic properties, but it also has the properties, has these anti-cancer, antibiotic, and that's mainly, again, due to these sugars, due to these polysaccharides that affect the immune system, energy metabolism, anti-fatigue. The fact that it's used with depression, in stamina stacking, the formula he uses this with his microdose. I'm still not sure why he's doing an overdose. You have a microdose of psilocybin and you have an overdose of niacin. I'm not exactly sure about that. Okay, traditionally, digestion, gastric ulcers, neurasthenia, general debility. And we have 2 main types of compounds, the hericinones and the cyanthine derivatives. And in this case, they've isolated to the hericinones are more concentrated in the fruiting bodies and stimulate nerve growth. This is just a couple of people who are saying this, and it's better for depression and mood disorders, where the cyanthine derivatives are found in higher concentration in the mycelium, and they slow the aging processes of the brain. Well, then they also promote brain health and help preserve the memory, but isn't that preserving neural connections and helping nerve growth stimulation, help grow? So I don't quite see the difference, but it's an interesting thing. I put CBG here, which is the precursor to all the cannabinoids, CBD, THC, and you can kind of see a resemblance between these. And CBD is also a neuroprotective. Let's see here. Again, this is a new book that's come out. I just put that here that we've talked about. And so here we have a review of neuroprotective mushrooms, and they have Hericium #1 and Ganoderma #2. Anything else we recognize? King oyster, Pleurotus giganticus. So that's something different. Grifola frondosa, Tremella corneris. Anyway, we'll skip this. Here they're just isolating different points and different causes of nerve damage, whether it's inflammatory stress or oxytocic stress. And inflammatory stress, that's mainly free radicals, right? Oftentimes it's free radicals, increasing nerve growth factor. I didn't want to get into a lot of mechanisms. I do like that one about mitochondrial dysfunction that has both Hericium and reishi there, lion's mane and reishi. And so I thought, well, we don't have Hericium, we don't have lion's mane in here. We do have some Coriolis. Is that how it said? Go ahead. I think that's wrong. think I said it wrong. But we do have a hericium derivative, but I thought, well, maybe, other tooth fungus also have some of these properties. And lo and behold, as we're going through this book, here's Sarcodon with the same types of compounds that lion's mane has, and neurotrophic, neurotogenic, and I'm not a big fan of Sarcodon. I was in high school, then it started getting bitter, but I had somebody make tamales with that were the best tamales I ever had. This is ergothioneine. This is the so-called new life long-lasting life vitamin. There's our limb. There's another nucleotide. So there's aridinine for cholesterol lowering. Okay, and again, it increases the breakdown and elimination. Let's see. One to have in your diet, absolutely. And in part 2, there's a lot of recipes in this book from a book of Chinese food as medicine with shiitake recipes with shrimp and all kinds of good stuff. Traditional dose of whole dried mushroom, 6 to 16 grams of fresh mushroom in teas and soup. Here's oyster with lovostatin. And again, the beta glucans. So lovostatin was actually first isolated from red yeast rice, if he says it's slow enough. And then Merck isolated it, did a synthetic beta synthesized it, got them, and then patented the molecule and forced the people who were selling red yeast rice to actually extract the lovostatin from it because it was too effective as an anti-cholesterol. And I thought they went to court, and broke that rule, and then now they still have full strength red yeast rice. But I haven't found the court proceedings. You notice that yeast has between 4 and 5% beta, or in an oat flake, there's 4 to 5.5% of beta glucans. They're not just mushrooms. This is where I was going to have the pathways and show you where they were blocked. This is where we have the Amanita muscaria, right? And so we couldn't find a pretty enough picture, so we wore our Vancouver mycologies. And when I first heard that this was being used for pain, and I hadn't heard that. I'd only heard of the use of Amanita muscaria as a psychotropic or as another worldly door. And so I went into it, and it turns out instead of having a monopolysaccharide with just glucose or fructose, it has a dipolysaccharide with galactose and mannose, I believe, which is anti-inflammatory. And of course, you have the ibotenic acid, which relates to GABA, which helps block pain medicines and pain signals. And it turns out people were using these as patients, taking small amounts internally, and it was working really well. And there seems to be a lot to it. I had a person visit from Japan, and he would always add a little button into a pot of soup as a flavor enhancer, because ibotenic acid is derived from glutamate, and there's a lot of sodium glutamate in a lot of mushroom shiitake. It gives us the umami taste. I just had to throw claviceps purpurea in there. Everybody knows claviceps. Okay, so the ergot alkaloids, not just LSD, but hydrogen, which has done a lot of brain prepare, get a telluride. It's another Sandoz, another Hoffman ergot compound. that was, it's a peptide ergot. And it was used for nerve damage and it was used for senility in Europe. And this fellow said that he had been deaf and doctors told him he'd never hear again. And he just started taking hydrogen and he regained his hearing. He wasn't lying about that. I presume the hydrogen. I like, there's all these forms of administration, dietary infusion, extraction. Definitely put it in your diet. I love making tea of it. I have a combination of lion's mane and maitake, and I actually have some here in a jar with some little bags if people want some, if we have some time afterwards. And it has, let's see, we have lion's mane, reishi, maitake. What am I forgetting? I sometimes put a little chog in, but I slowed down on the chog at my time. Reishi, lion's mane, cordyceps, thank you. And then we also have some turmeric and some pepper and some cinnamon and some nutmeg, and then you put in a piece of dark chocolate in the bottom of your cup, and you put in your coffee, and you're stirring your powdered mushrooms, and you put it in the microwave so the coffee melts. It's really, really good. I do at least. Here's some tendon easy powder. We're doing the end. You guys have done really great helping me there. You know, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 mushrooms. Each pill weighs 9 grams and involves honey. I love that. What's going on here? What happened? There we go. Some URL resources. Looking so slow. Michael Webb, we love Michael Wood. Professor Volk's side, of course. Botany Research Labs in Canada, Toronto. Mushroom Journal. Cornell's Mycological Resources. National Center for Biotech. Mycology Research Labs. Science Cancer Research in the UK. Fungi Perfecti. A lot of images can be found in bioimages.org. This is kind of old, but this is still good. Let's see here. And then there's these 2 sites, the genome site and the protein site, which are really useful. Really, I can't over describe how useful they are. There we go. Some books. Hobbs has a new books out. This fungi pharmacopoeia is, I just found it in Oakland. It's really nice. That's where the international special edition of food reviews is all about mushrooms. There's an international journal, which is on mushrooms, of course. Robert's book, and he also has a nice little book that's just a summary of some of the big ones. Okay, I just like pictures of books. All right, I want to thank my volunteers. We have Izzy, we have Izzy, our dog, who got diagnosed with meningoencephalitis of unknown origin. They kicked it back with prednisone and low-dose chemotherapy. It's an autoimmune disease. She responded really well, but they had an MRI of her brain, and it was just glowing. It was just the blood-brain barrier was messed up. The myelin sheath was messed up. We started immediately giving her lion's mane and other neuroprotective mushrooms without, of course, telling our veterinarian. And she's doing really, really good. She started just running around in circles. That's all she do, and then falling over, and then she couldn't even get up. And she's doing really well. Our neighbor's dog is 15 years old. She's doing pretty good. They were going to put her to sleep, and we put her on mushrooms. So far, so good. I have a friend with bladder cancer. We have a friend who has had all these cancers, and it's all moved around. He's on one of our volunteers. Another one has lung cancer. A friend has had a stroke. I have a friend with terrible COPD, autoimmune lupus, and fatty liver. Those are our volunteers, and we really want to thank them. And there's Izzy. Thanks to Greg for giving me the opportunity. Thanks to you for coming. and giving me the time and attention, my wife and Izzy. And we need to thank the mushrooms, of course. That's it. Thank you very much.
9:15 right now.
Questions?
Might have a chance for questions.
We have time for questions?
Yeah, sure. Anybody has any questions? Go ahead.
Or is everybody turned out? Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I know
young
there's a
lady.
lot of capsules.
No, I think some of them are here, so long as they've grown their mushrooms well and they stand behind their product. It's a known dose if they've been grown well. Some people prefer capsules. I like the taste of the mushrooms. I'm putting in like a teaspoon or half a teaspoon to a teaspoon. I'm doing, so to get the dose, I don't like taking, I take so many supplements, I need to write a book, is what I say. And, we're working on it, but it's like, I don't like to take as many capsules as when I can take all my mushrooms and put them into my cup of coffee, I love doing it that way. But I think capsules are great if that's the way you like taking them. I'm sorry?
Where do you find the turkey killer
I bought mine, I met this woman from Wholesome Wellness, as you're talking about bulk powders. Are you talking about powders? You're talking about finding them. There's 4 ways to go find them. We were talking about Ganoderma applanatum. Rishi grows back east. I recommend Wholesome Wellness. She used to work for Stamets and she decided that she could do better. And she's done really well. Her powders are really fine. So they suspend well in, coffee and things like that. They pack well into, I get 600 milligrams of cordyceps into a capsule for my friends who just want to take capsules. But yeah, good. There's nothing wrong with a good capsule. And what is good about a capsule, I'm sorry, excuse me, Director, is in place of an extract is that you're getting the whole mushroom. I think it's really good to get the whole mushroom body.
We do have some mushroom cultivator
Yes.
types in our group
There
here.
you go.
Fresh from the Farm Fungi
There you go.
and Mushroom Cult are 2 cultivating
Thank you.
groups.
And
And
say
they
local.
might know how to create kits for growing things like cremides.
Oh, that's what I forgot to mention. Yeah, get a kit and grow it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, growing is fun.
Yeah, get a kit and grow it.
There's more just a question. Did you say full sun?
Yes, it's one word.
Was there any other?
Full Sun Wellness is what I've stuck with for now. I don't usually buy mushrooms. I usually grow them for myself.
And I forgot to point out that Jeff Ravage probably knows how to grow trees.
Jeff, do you know how to grow mushrooms?
Yes.
Okay.
I saw on one of your slides, but I don't think we got into it. What is your opinion of whole fruit mushroom versus the brown rice and mycelium?
I know a lot of people are really against the brown rice mycelium, but I like it personally. I don't think it has a concentration of components that the whole fruit does. And obviously, the whole fruit is the fruit, right? We don't tend to eat apple branches, but we smoke our food. But I like the mycelium. And I like the grains. I like the way the grain tastes and how it's been modified. Again, I'm not opposed to it, but I think you're better off with the whole mushroom. And I like the powdered drinks that mycelium is made of. And in the case of Bericium, where they're saying there's a difference between the mycelium and the whole mushroom, I think it's a good way to get the mycelium. I just have like having, oatmeal, rice meal, that you make the tea out of.
This isn't a question, but something I like doing is
Good.
consuming liquid cultures of them.
Yeah.
There's actually a company, Mycological, which sells like a variety of liquid cultures.
Which
that
ones
you
are you
drink.
doing?
What?
Are medicinals or
Yeah, like reishi
region cordyceps? So they're live cultures?
Yeah, he actually has like 2 different species in one product, and it's a living liquid culture. You can even inoculate agar with it. It's
Cool.
called Mycological.
Well, Myco T, did everybody here get that? And what were the ones again that are our local growers?
Mushroom Cult is Zach, I don't remember his last name,
Yeah.
and then Greg Gary Hefferly
yeah.
from Fresh from the Farm
And
Fungi.
he does Cherry Creek farmers markets.
Yeah, they do the Cherry Creek Farmers Market.
Wow.
I have
Great.
So is any of the research you've seen deal with the duration? Like I came across some research with cordyceps and was saying, they didn't see initial benefits, but after 3 weeks.
That's
And,
a
and so
really
what
good
what
point.
causes that?
On most of these studies that they're now finally doing with the mushrooms, when they're using mushrooms, and even like when they're using isolated fraction D, they're seeing 3 weeks at least before they're seeing results. And most of these studies are going on for 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 8 weeks. And that's when it's not like a Western medicine pill where you take it and you drop your blood pressure. It's not, it's not going to be like Viagra where you take it and you're ready to go in an hour. Okay. So, but it has a great, long lasting effect, and it actually alters you. It's healing. It's a much more healing approach. I mean, that sounds kind of hokey, but that's what it is. It's repair. It's like, for instance, when my friend was going through his esophagus treatments, and they knew when they were hitting his tumor on that they were going to mess up his esophagus, but they gave him no aloe to help protect his esophagus when they were doing the treatments or anything like that. It's like, well, it's just a nerve. It's like, well, chemotherapy does this, but I need this. They don't heal. Plants heal. Mushrooms can heal. Slower processes are more healing. I know that sounds. I'm a chemist. I believe in them both. Yes. Who's talking? Yes, young man.
Is there a mushroom that's poisonous but doesn't look poisonous?
Yeah, all of the poisonous ones look really beautiful and good to eat. I'm afraid to say a lot of them.
Or not poisonous that look very poisonous?
Oh, probably. There's some weird looking mushrooms, like maybe have you ever seen the wood ear mushroom that looks really, it's just like, it just looks like this alien ear. That looks kind of creepy to eat, I would say. That's a good question. Andy, can you think of any
Some
particulars?
parts of the world, they eat stinkhorns.
Have you ever seen a
And those
stink
not
horn?
only look odd, but they smell odd too.
Yeah.
But if you get the right pieces,
Yeah,
I mean,
either
Chinese
the
hot
veil or
pots,
the egg, yeah.
yeah, but they take the stem, and it doesn't taste like anything. It's more of a texture.
Coral fungus look kind of weird, but they don't necessarily look poisonous. I guess it depends on, your imagination, what you see, what something looks like. That's okay, go ahead.
Are there any weird mushrooms that are actually very tasty?
I think all mushrooms are weird because I would like to consider myself to be, along that lines. Yep, there are, how do you compare, what's the difference between a weird mushroom and a not weird mushroom? I guess is what I don't
So like
understand.
they have unusual shapes and stuff like that.
The coral fungus, right? That coral mushroom that I was talking about, it looks like a coral. Or cauliflower mushroom, looks like, these leaves or a rose coming out of it. Lion's mane is a real interesting. It's not your typical cap in a stem. There's a lot of different shaped mushrooms. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say the witch's butter. When
There you
when
go,
look-
witch's butter.
Some of them look like boogers and they taste delicious.
And I think there's a lot of trehalose in that. Go ahead. Sir.
What's part two?
I'd love to do part two. I loved part two. I actually cut it out of there so I wouldn't go more. But it's really interesting to go look at, the combinations of herbs and mushrooms, and to look how traditional Chinese medicine is taken. I mean, real quickly, like angry eyes and associating the eyes, angry eyes and green with envy. And those are Western connotations that Chinese medicine has. And they use your liver and, problems with your eyes and your mood for diagnosis. And, it's really complex and it's really beautiful. And there's nothing to say it's lasted this long. Okay, go ahead.
Similar question to Greg's kind of follow up. Do we know anything about a half-life on like things like lion's mane and when we can notice a decline in effect?
Oh, that's also a good question. And I don't know.
I have some anecdotal stuff from my mom
Good,
who's
good,
suffering
good.
dementia. About a week and a half after not taking it,
Thank you,
I can
guys.
notice a difference.
She doesn't notice or she does?
I noticed the difference.
You
in
noticed
about
the
a week
difference,
and a
sure.
week and a half, week
Okay.
afterwards, after cessation.
Okay, that's, it's time for her to start taking it again. Okay, so how long does she go between that time off?
Very, very infrequently now. Now that I notice it, it's more like
Pretty
keep,
fast,
keep
yeah.
pumping. But yeah,
Did
just
she start
something
taking, did
anecdotal
she
is-
start taking it before she had?
No, afterward.
Yeah, so, I pretty much say, oh, I should take a break, and then I just end up wanting to put it in my coffee because it tastes so good. It's probably the chocolate. It's partly the chocolate, yes.
Do you know any noticeable differences in levels of what you get? Fresh versus powdered?
Well, there's the woody mushrooms, I like powdered, and now they're starting, most good companies are starting to pressure treat them prior to powdering them and pressure treating the powder. And that helps release the terpenes. I'm not so sure. There's papers talking about whether it lowers the levels of the concentrations. It certainly does drop down some of the polyphenols, they get oxidized. Maybe, these are pretty big terpenes, so they're not all that volatile as the others, but it helps release the beta glucans is what they're claiming. And that's when I thought, well, geez, I thought, I thought the chitin was covering the beta glucans, breaking down. And then it took me a while actually to find a good picture of a cell wall and see that the chitin is just underneath. So, but it's the pressure cooking of the pressure cooking does help release some of the nutrients and the medicinal compounds. And it certainly makes for a nice powder, a nice product. It seems to me, I really, does that answer your question?
I mean, yeah.
Okay, well, I think I got distracted, okay? Okay,
No, you're good.
but oh, I know what I want to mention. I think eating it is the best thing to do.
Okay.
Eating it is the best thing to do. Add it to your diet. Shiitake, I kind of just spaced out. Shiitake, I need more, a lot more lion's mane. Shiitake and oyster are both active on a dietary level. Hericium is active on a dietary. You're cooking it. It's it's not the you could look at these procedures and how kind of what pressures and what temperatures they're using in their roasting it for 25 minutes at 370 degrees. That sounds a little high to me, but that's a procedure I found. But it's like you're cooking it, you're releasing it, chew your food, make a nice tea out of it. The fiber itself is good. Yes, it can. But again, the cell walls, these antioxidant protective cell walls, are a big deal. They're really nice.
Okay, we've got time for one last question.
Thank you. Yes. Say again. What mushrooms did they use for hearing?
Yeah.
I don't remember. I would go with.
Don't look at me.
Did I mention hearing as a mushroom?
It might have been claviceps.
Oh yeah, no, that was hydrogen, and it wasn't a mushroom. It was an ergot-derived compound from Sandoz created by Albert Hoffman, and it's a ergot peptide. It's HYDERGINE. And they sell it, and they still use it in Canada. You could get it in Canada at a pharmacy for neuroregeneration, stuff like that. That's what you're talking about. DERGINE, hydrogen. Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. When I was in Canada, after I heard his story and after I read about it, I went to the pharmacy and said, I'd like a bottle of hydrogen, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's
Thank
do
you
one
guys so
last round of
much.
applause for Marc. Next time we'll try to get the air con to continue to work. I think they shut it off before 6 p.m. to save
Oh.
energy, but they don't know we're here, so it won't be quite as stuffy next time. But the next meeting we will have July 11th, same time, And it will be, as I mentioned before, more of a workshop. And we'll put on the website the different aspects that we'll have during the workshop and what people can gain from attending. Okay, thank you for coming. Go ahead and exit through the first floor of this building, out the main doors. They're automatic and they'll let you exit. They won't let you back in.
Greg, is there a best way to reach out to you about volunteering for specific things?
Yeah. I mean, just. Yeah, the president.
Thanks.
Hi,
question?
Well, yeah,
Can we get a copy of your
I think, I don't know why not.
Like Greg was thinking.
I'm,
I'd also love.
oh, I meant to have my email address at the end here. It's like, God says in his word, one of those is yours and one of these is mine. Okay, thank you. Let me see, I'll tell you how big it is.
That'd be awesome.
And
Awesome. See you around.
Well, one thing.
they're in Congress.
92.1 megabytes.
Oh, thank you so much.
I think it's possible, and I think, yeah,
Yeah, like, I don't
it's
know why
possible. I
it's
think they're gonna have this.
No, or that they're gonna post it as, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so then, yeah, you'll have the whole lecture. That's where the screenshot all the slides.
Okay.
But if that, but my email, and that was supposed to be on there, is mammothmushroom@yahoo.com.
Mammoth.
Mushroom.
Just learning about.
Yeah,
If you think if you search it.
yeah, one word.
Thank you.
Mammoth. M-A-M-M-O-T-H.
Yes, OTA.
It's all okay. So 2 M's in the middle. Okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
really
Yeah,
interested
one
in
word,
like-
mammoth mushroom.
Mammoth, okay.
Hey, it's,
And you are?
I'm Peter.
Hi, Peter.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Nice to meet you.
nice, thanks.
it's Ophiocordyceps senescens
Oh.
this week.
Oh, yes, yes, okay.
This week.
Yeah, I bet to have both slides where, okay, we're gonna call it cordyceps this time, and Ophiocordyceps the other time.
I'm
Questions?
wondering about the powder slash lotion that you.
Oh, we have, let's see. Okay,
You did, you said shiitake lotion, I think, and I
Yeah.
was like very curious.
you wanna try some? Do you have time to stay in here for a bit? For a second? Barely.
They don't know we're here any.
Oh, they don't know we're here?
Let me shut this guy down.
Anybody else wanna try some? Can I break my sticks in? Yes. We have a micro company called Mammoth Mountain Mushrooms and Mammoth Mountain.
Thanks.
It's more of a serum than I forget what, anybody want to try some
And you
shiitake
said-
lotion?
That this holds moisture, was that your point?
Yes,